Millennials are now the largest generation in the workforce. Not sure as a Generation Xer and an older Gen Xer at that. I'm really happy about that, but it is reality now. They're 35% of the workforce, according to a recent Pew Research study. So, what does this mean for the rest of us in the workforce?
Yeah, it's really interesting because they say that there are five generations in the workforce, but for all practical purposes, there are really three. It's the boomers, us Gen Xers, and then this new breed, the millennials, that everybody's trying to figure out. And because they are the majority in the workforce now, it's really an obligation to figure it out. And fortunately, I think it's not that complicated. When we really look at all the generations, we all have a lot more in common than we have differences. And I think just the older we get, we forget what we were like when we were younger. And that's really one of the biggest barriers is that it's not that they're so different, but it's that we're getting older and times are changing and habits are changing, but the values are not. And that's the great part is that we can really build cross-generational relationships based on values, even though the way we express ourselves is quite different.
All right, now help me with this one then. I could remember when I started in the workforce, and I probably started before you did because I'm actually Generation Jones. That subgroup between the baby boomers and the youngest of the baby boomers and the oldest of the Gen Xers.
Right.
When I went into the workforce, we were basically told by the baby boomers and the silent generation who were, there before us, sit back, listen to us, learn from us. You're going to have your opportunity soon enough. Well, when that opportunity came around, here come the millennials, and they're like, sorry, they know more than you do. Step
Yeah.
aside. How do
Yeah.
we do it?
Yeah, so that's complicated. And when I speak to groups, a lot of my audiences are baby boomers, but a lot more obviously today because I speak in corporations and associations, a lot more of them are millennials now. And one of the important things that millennials have to understand is that experience and wisdom only comes with age. There's no shortcut to it. And so the truth is, the older generations do have a lot of value, and it's very important that the millennials recognize that and appreciate that. But the same thing can be said in the opposite direction, which is younger generations bring a certain idealism, which can be very valuable, especially with a large generation like the millennials. And we're in kind of a weird place in the world, and there's a lot of conflict. So some of the idealism can actually stick. So it has to be a very collaborative relationship. It's not just about the boomers understanding and respecting the millennials, but the millennials also have to do that as well. And the way to inspire the millennial generation to do that is to really give them that opportunity to come into the workplace, express their ideas, try out their ideas. And if they fail, great, because we all learn best from failure. And then they can get up and try something new again. And I think it's that combination of what we know works and also getting away from, well, that's always worked. Why do we need to change it? If we can bridge those two ideas, then we can really have a lot of productivity in the workplace and bring our companies into the future.
A lot of millennials have a mindset that to those of us who are from older generations seems, extremely, I guess in the most complimentary terms, they're entrepreneurial. In the least complimentary terms, they're non-committal.
Yeah.
They're not loyal to anything, at least as far as looking through it through a Gen Xers or a baby boomers lens would be. So we know that there are more millennials than ever that are working in the workforce, but what do we need to know about how they work in the workforce so we can make things as productive as possible?
Right. So let's unpack what you just said because it's really important. The idea that they are both the most entrepreneurial and perhaps the least committal generation that we've seen in the workforce is exactly right. And the reasons why this is the case is what we have to understand. This is a generation that grew up at a time of the collapse of Wall Street and high unemployment after that. This was the generation that was told, you go to this preschool, you'll graduate from Harvard, and you'll get an amazing job. Well, they went to that preschool, they went into debt to go to Harvard, and then the job wasn't there. So they are very, sheepish about trusting these sort of long-term viewpoints. They're also a generation that doesn't really invest. They're a generation that saw their parents' pensions get taken away. So they've taken this attitude of, I want my destiny to be in my own hands, and I want to be an entrepreneur, and I don't want to go out and work for the company. And that's also why they're not really committing to anything long term. But I actually think that this is a great opportunity because the best employees are the ones that have an entrepreneurial mindset. And if we can give these employees the ability to try out those ideas, as I mentioned earlier, and to take some ownership in those ideas, then we can really, use this as a great opportunity to tap into some new ideas and develop workplace environments where this generation feels they can make a difference, because that's the biggest thing, is they are not motivated by profits as much as they are motivated by purpose. So if we
Now,
always put purpose in front, we have a much better chance of recruiting and retaining this generation.
unlike the Generation Xers, we wanted money, right?
Yeah,
That's all we
but
money.
that's
That's
true.
what we can
And
get.
yeah, we that's true. We did, and the baby boomers really wanted security. And let's face it, we all want job security. But as we've seen in recent times, especially during the growth spurt of the millennials, is that job security really doesn't exist. So they're not investing in the idea of security.
I'm watching my husband, who is a 30-year veteran of Wall Street, who was one of the many casualties during the recession, who has adopted a millennial type attitude towards his new career.
Yeah,
It's all about what is best for him. It's not so much, being loyal to the employer, even though he's a good employee, but it really is, and it's interesting to see how, that attitude has transcended generations out of necessity.
yeah, I would somewhat agree with that with the millennials, but where I would differ is while they are kind of a me generation, which I think is what the baby boomers were originally called as well. With the millennials, it's not just what's in it for me, but it's how can I work best in order to have a meaningful life that makes a difference in the world. So, in a sense, their viewpoint on this is, yeah, I have to serve myself first, but if I do that well, then I can effectively implement some of these idealistic ideas that I have to make the world a better place. It's kind of like the airplane analogy. When the oxygen mask falls down, you got to put it on yourself before you can help your child. And I think that's in some way the way the generation is looking, is that they have to settle their own affairs in order to really be effective for the world, because they are pretty socially minded in that sense.
All right, so now that we know what they are bringing to the workforce, I'm going to get real with you here. It's hard to deal with them sometimes.
Yeah.
They have a very different idea of, you know, what jives in the workforce and what doesn't. I mean, let's start with what a lot of them are wearing to work. I mean, flip-flops
Yeah.
and, very casual attire and um setting your own hours, and I want time for social media. This is all stuff that is completely foreign to us.
Yeah, but you know what's so interesting about this is that this is, prior generations, we've all as a society struggled with the work-life balance. But what's interesting about this generation is it's no longer about a work-life balance. It's about a work-life integration. These two things really have to come together. There isn't the separation that we all used to look for. Now it's about how do I integrate it? And the advantage of this from an employer's point of view is that the reality is you're probably going to get more hours out of each employee in a 24-hour day as a result. And those hours are likely going to be more productive because the burnout rate's going to go down if that lifestyle and comfort is really brought into the workplace as well. So workplace environment and tolerance of some of those things, in the right setting, of course, but if it can be tolerated, it can actually improve productivity and happiness in the workplace.
All right, so now we know what we need to do to make every generation come together. And right as we're learning this, here comes another generation, Generation Z. The first ones are already in the workforce.
Yeah.
How are they gonna? How is that going to be the fly in the ointment, or is it going to take us to that next level of this cooperation and consciousness?
Yeah, what's interesting what we're seeing now, because this generation, the Gen Zs, are just becoming, they're about 18 now, the earliest iteration. So, they'll get a name soon. Us Gen Xers, we never got a name for whatever reason. But, so these Gen Zs will be named pretty soon. And
All the slackers, like what else did they call us? It was nothing very very complimentary, I have to say.
nothing official and nothing complimentary, nothing official, right? We have the millennials who are Gen Y. We had Gen X, who was us, and then before it's the boomers. So, yeah, we're all in this workplace together, and that's why it has to be really collaborative. But what's interesting about the next generation is that companies again will have to pivot a little bit to accommodate them. And I always talk about pivot. It's a word that's really important to me and so important. I'm writing a book about it because it's never about jumping into a whole new realm of how to deal with a generation. It's just about making some small shifts in order to make some big leaps in terms of how we all relate. But this generations typically are just a pendulum swing, and one generation pulls the pendulum too far, and then the next generation pulls it back. Well, here's what's really interesting about what's going on. The director of the lab on aging at Harvard Medical School says that the first person to live until 150 has already been born. So that means that we are having elongated lifespans, more and more for each generation. It means that means 100 years of productivity, perhaps 100 years in the workplace. So that's one of the reasons why these younger generations are non-committal and job hopping and jumping around, because they're going to live a long time. So they have to spend more time figuring out what it is that they're going to do. Yet at the same time, technology is making everything move a lot faster in these sort of micro environments. Everything's moving faster because of technology. So we have this sort of fast-paced lifestyle, but at the same time, it's in an overall elongated idea that I think for the first time, we're going to see Gen Z not push the pendulum back the way it's always happened, but actually keep pulling that pendulum a little bit further. So we're going to see more, I think, of this non-investing mentality. But by the same token, because of the rapid pace that technology has us moving, it's almost unfair to look at a generation as 18 to 20 years now. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody, every 5 years is kind of operating in a very different environment, especially, with AI and technology. But where Gen Z is showing some swinging the pendulum back is that they are seemingly valuing face-to-face communication more, which is great. I mean, the telephone is a thing of the past. That's not going to
Yeah.
function as a telephone. But the idea of certainly video communication, but even just face-to-face human interaction that's where the pendulum's going to swing back with this generation. So that's a very positive thing, I think.
Ravi, I wish I had more time to talk to you because there are so many things I would like to ask you about, including all of the jobs that you have worked in. I want to talk to you at some point about how being the guitarist for Hanson
Yeah.
has
Yeah. Well,
helped in this.
and remember, that was one of the first millennial bands on the planet. So I got, having worked with baby boomers for many years before that, I got thrown into millennial mayhem.
You about that at some point, and everything else that you've done. I mean, I see here that you're related to some very influential people,
Yeah.
not just here in the United States but also in India. So I think another interview is certainly in order if we can make that happen.